Welcome to part three of my sit down. I left off last with kind words from Tyson Dukes and Joe Legend. But there's two other people that really helped me at Squared Circle, and one was Ash. Now you can search his wrestling out as Ashley Six. I remember we were doing just a match in class, and I did something in the match, and he really reacted to it, and he said he really liked what we did and stuff. So right then, I knew that he believed in me. And off to the side, he was speaking with two other guys, Hornet and Anton Arrakis, and they were talking about a road trip on the weekend to Detroit. So I said, "Hey guys, if there's any room in the car, can I please hop in?" And they instantly said yes. And to kind of bring that all around, that's something that's missing in wrestling. I think people don't travel as much. People don't just hop in a car at a chance to get booked. And I'll cover that a lot throughout these sit down interviews, because that was something we came across a lot too. And a good friend, Ethan Page, who I helped train, is going through that now. So people aren't just willing to hop in a car with the opportunity. That's how you get booked. You get in a car and you travel, and they need a guy, and you're there, and somebody vouches for you, and you get on the show, and then you continue to wrestle on that show, and it all comes full circle. And throughout my stories, you'll see how full circle things can come. So we were headed to Detroit. I remember I was working at Swish LA, and I asked for the weekend off, and they said we can't do it. So I called and told them that a family member passed away, which I ended up losing the job for that, because they know that a family member didn't pass away because I'd asked for it off. But I drove to Detroit, and I had my first match. My first match was for none other than Truth Martini. He was holding a benefit show, and it was myself, Ash, Anton Arrakis, and Hornet in a four-way. And there's some funny things in the match I remember. It was my first real match. I'd had matches at the old school in front of a crowd, but I don't really consider them my pro debut. I would consider this my pro debut. And I remember some funny things, like they were doing something where they were supposed to backdrop somebody on me, and it was Hornet and Anton Arrakis. And I was selling to the floor, and they started running the opposite way of me. And I was like, oh, what are they doing? And then they realized that they're in the wrong position, so Hornet kind of fluffed Anton Arrakis, and he didn't get over to the apron. So what he did was try to jump, and he got his leg caught in the apron, so that was kind of funny. Or sorry, his leg caught in the ropes, which I still remember because that night he was limping all around. It really bruised his calf. But little things like that were fun from the match. I remember I wore some zebra stripe shorts and a pink shirt. And man, it was, I didn't know my identity yet. I just wanted to wrestle. I took what I had, and I remember wrestling in that. And I remember it being a fun four-way. And then the next night we did XICW, which now I've had a storied past with, and that was my second match ever. And it was a handicap match against Devil Dog. Now at that time, Devil Dog was kind of rugged in the ring. And I remember hearing that everybody was sitting at the apron seeing if myself and Hornet would get hurt. Now, Devil Dog was a good guy, and he still is. Anytime I've met him and spoke with him since, he's great. But some people, when they get into wrestling, they're just rugged. They don't understand exactly what it is, and unfortunately, at that time, he was. But I hold that trip near and dear because it started my career. Another person in training was Sin. You may know him as Kazarni when he was part of WWE. But he was real good friends with Ash, and we were the two guys that were willing to travel whenever, wherever. I remember, I was in grade 12, and he called me and said, hey, do you want to go on a road trip tomorrow? Be at my house at 5 a.m. And he called me a Thursday night, and I said, I still am in high school. He said, do you want to be a wrestler? I said, yeah. So I met him at his house at 5 a.m., myself, Ash, him, and we met up with Elliot, in Ohio. And we went out for the weekend and got some work. So he was a big component from the early stages of my career. He let me hop in the car with him all over the place. I remember traveling everywhere on God's green earth with him, man. He was a warrior. He just would go anywhere and everywhere that he could get booked. And that's something that I learned early. You have to get out there. You have to try and work as much as possible, because that's the only thing that's going to make you better. So now school's going on. I'm traveling a lot for wrestling. And my teacher's real cool. If I had to miss a Friday for wrestling, I would get the assignments early, and I would finish it up, and I would ask for the homework and everything like that. So I was still paying attention to school, still wrestling a lot. Now, I'd only had a few matches, and I was playing lacrosse, and I broke my hand. Now I was still young, and obviously my mom was always worried about the wrestling, injuring me. So I'm 17 years old. I got a broken hand, and I'm about to wrestle in my hometown of Oshawa. And the first thing I did when I got to the hospital when I broke my hand was, called my buddies and called the promoter and said, "Hey, I can't make it. Please find a replacement." And that also kind of got me good standing with promotions because I was responsible enough to call them first thing. I didn't call anybody else outside of wrestling. They were the first thought was, I got to tell them I can't make that show. So I had 3.5 months off with my broken hand. At that age, I didn't know that I could probably still wrestle around a broken hand. So the 3 months off, before then I probably had about 40 matches. And I came back and I still didn't quite have an identity. I got better looking gear. I was more focused, but I was still just an indie guy doing everything that I watch on tapes. Throughout that 3 months off, that's all I did was watch wrestling. I watched a lot of indie wrestling, as I mentioned. I was starting to get into CZW and Ring of Honor, and ECWA Super 8 tournaments, all that kind of stuff. And I was just kind of doing stuff. And that's basically how the first part of my career went. I was just trying to do whatever I could to impress a crowd so that I would get more bookings. And in Canada, I was getting tons of bookings, and I was also traveling quite a bit. A lot of the time we would go to Montreal, a lot of the time we would go to Ohio and Michigan just because they were semi-close. And wherever Nick would get, or Sin would get bookings, we'd hop in the car with him too. So, the end of grade 12, I was wrestling. I had applied for firefighting at Sir Sanford Fleming and Durham College. I got accepted into both and decided to go to Peterborough to Fleming. So I went for their firefighting course, and the same thing, man. The teachers thought it was cool that I was wrestling at the time. They really stood by me, and the same type of thing. I'd say, "Sir, I need to not be here Friday. Is there anything I can do in preparation for that?" And they were really lenient with that kind of stuff. So I give a lot of credit to the teachers in high school and the teachers in college, because without them, I wouldn't have traveled the roads like I did. So I graduated college. That course was a year. I'm not trying to skim through everything, but I think the more further I go in this story, the more you really see everything that I went through. There's little things here and there, but at this time I wasn't doing too many matches that were relevant. I wasn't doing too many shows that people would hear about. So I graduated college, and then we started kicking into full gear. Canada Day was coming up, which is much like the 4th of July here in the States. And Ash called me. He said, "Hey, I'm going to Minnesota this weekend. Would you like to come?" And I said, "Yeah, I would love to come." Okay, I'm sorry. No, I'm on the right timeline. Again, it's hard to remember all this. It's been many years of wrestling, and sometimes you forget the timeline of stuff. So he said, "Let's go to Minnesota. It's 3 shows. Do you want to come?" So I canceled my Canada Day plans, which was a lost relationship and a lost job again. But, I'm happy now, so it doesn't matter. But we went to Minnesota, and we wrestled for NIW. And that's when I first met Eric Cannon and BJ Whitmer. Jimmy Jacobs, I'd known from shows here and there in Detroit, but we got to drive with him up there, so we really got kind of a rapport with each other. And the promoter liked me the first 2 nights, so he put the tag team titles on myself and Ash, which isn't a big deal. I don't think titles was a huge deal. But it guaranteed us more bookings with that company, which is what you want. You want to impress people so they'll bring you back. And then we impressed enough to be their tag champion, so we had to come back. And throughout that weekend, I was talking to BJ Whitmer. I was speaking with Jimmy Jacobs and Eric Cannon. And then about 2 weeks later, a good friend of mine, Steve Brown, was running NSW. And the main event was myself, Kevin Steen, BJ Whitmer, and Timothy Dalton in a 4-way. And the match went pretty well. And BJ Whitmer, I took him aside. I said, "Hey, is there anything you can tell me? Is there any advice you can give me?" And he said he was really impressed, especially with the experience and me not being a name he's heard before, that I seemed like I was in the right place at the right time and really knew what I was doing. So I kept in touch with him. And then about a month later, Steve Brown again with NSW booked Jimmy Rave. And I had a singles match with Jimmy Rave. And he was also very impressed and said, "Man, you know, you do. Your timing was right. Your position was right." And automatically, I started talking to him about Ring of Honor. And within that, I was talking to him about Ring of Honor. I was talking to Eric Cannon, Jimmy Jacobs, and BJ Whitmer about IWA. And in 2006, Ian Rotten called me and asked me if myself and Ashley Six wanted to come up for a show, and we did. So that trip in Minnesota that I wasn't booked on going up with, and I met people part of IWA, really helped me get out there, and that was a big deal. You know, that really helped me. I still didn't quite have my identity yet. I was still unreal Michael Elgin. I just did flashy stuff for the sake of it, and sometimes we still do. I'm not saying that we don't. You got to do whatever the crowd expects of you. You got to make sure that the crowd's happy watching what they see. So you got to wrestle for your audience. But at the time, I wasn't just wrestling for the audience. I was wrestling for myself. I was just trying to get my name out there. So in September of 2006, I believe, we drove up to Ian Rotten's, and it was the Lethal Lottery. And no matter what you think, it was a legitimate lethal lottery, which meant when they pulled the names in the ring, you went out and wrestled. And I teamed with Jason Dukes against Ian Rotten and Vito Tomaselli. And I remember we were just about to start getting in the steam of things, and I hadn't really done much in the match. You know, Vito and Ian were leading, and myself and Jason Dukes were kind of on the defense. And then about as I'm sparked to pick up some offense, I remember being in the ring and going for a dive, and then a fan attacked Ian. So that caused a bunch of hiccups on the outside, and Ian rolled in, and we finished the match and went to the back. And I thought for sure that was going to be it for me. I thought that I would never go back. Then in January of 2007, I hadn't been back to Ian Rotten's yet, but I was still wrestling as much as possible. NSW, Steve Brown, and GCW in my hometown was booked me against a lot of guys that they brought in. I got to work with Tyson Kidd, Samoa Joe, Rhino, Bobby Roode, and GCW. And at NSW, I was working with guys like Jimmy Rave and BJ Whitmer and Jay Lethal. And I was told to email Gabe Sapolsky, who's booking Ring of Honor at the time, and see if I could come up for the weekend. So I emailed him, I canceled my show, and I drove up to Boston and New Jersey. And I had my first dark match in January of 2007 against Shane Hagedorn in New Jersey. And Gabe said, you know, get an identity, change your gear, and keep in touch. And that all came from traveling. That all came from being on the road and hopping in cars when you didn't know if you were booked or not. And that was a big deal. And then in February, Ian had myself and Ash return as a tag team. And that was where my journey into IWA Mid-South started. So I think next time we'll pick back up with that, and we'll keep going. So hopefully you guys are enjoying this. I'm going to film Friday. It's my first time back to AEW in quite some time, and I'm excited. So I'm going to film that day on the road and get it up. And then I'm going to film a bit from the ROH camp this weekend. So hopefully you guys keep watching, and hopefully you guys are enjoying it. And have a good day and a safe weekend.